Bill from Sydney, Australia. Glad you're here, Bill. This is great to see all of you guys filling the room. Wonderful. We've got Seattle, Hunter with daughters Goldie and Maisie. Welcome, guys. Glad you're here. We have two more people from Oregon, from Portland, Christine. Thanks for being here. We've got Terry from Milwaukee. We've got Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Cindy, two people. Thanks for being here. Terrific. Olina from Triton. River Forest, we've got in the house again. Wonderful. Great. Well, let that keep going. Keep checking in. Tacoma, Washington, Marengo, Illinois, Highwood, Illinois, two from Atlanta. Keep checking in, and I will go ahead and move us forward. So I am Anna Garcia Doyle. I'm the executive director of the One Earth Film Festival. I want to welcome you to our virtual screening and discussion, which we hope will present rich opportunities for learning and provide a brave and safe space for important conversations that matter deeply right now in our country and across the globe. One Earth's 10th season theme is inspiring change. Mermaids Against Plastic and Damned to Extinction inspired me to want to do more. Both films gave us a glimpse into the critical struggles of our oceans and waterways, the scourge of plastics in our seas, and responsible approaches for preserving interconnected marine species. As you watch, think of questions for all of the filmmakers and our advocacy partner who will dialogue with us afterwards. I don't really want to go any farther without thanking our sponsors and partners without whom we could not do this work. So I'd like to thank Go Green Barrington, the Park District of Oak Park, and the Sierra Club. Another quick note is that if your circumstances allow, please donate to support One Earth's nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more at oneearthfilmfestival.org.
We are thrilled you're with us as One Earth Film Fest celebrates 10 years of inspiring change and utilizes the power of film to spark change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like social justice. The fest has had to adapt to a virtual format, but we strive to stay true to our model. While we're not physically together, we are here together, live, virtually, still able to create community, become aware of issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. African-American activist Angela Davis said, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world." The stories in our fest films reflect that possibility. Our collective actions will achieve that possibility. Our event will take place in 4 parts. We'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a great discussion after the film. We'll then watch it together. Then afterwards, we'll unpack the film's themes in a facilitated Q&A with our wonderful panelists. Please participate by using the chat to share thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These actions come from our panelists and other action partners. As we live current movements and reframe narratives around justice, environment, and bringing innovative, equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we're hopeful for the future. I am grateful to the knowledgeable filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other fest events. They'll guide discussions to help spark and sustain actions for the protection of our One Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. We've found that shared agreements help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe these agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect. Engage your active listening, use I statements and get comfortable with your own story. Acknowledge Native peoples who came before us in protecting our land. One last thing before we meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people this is happening. Amplify these voices and be part of the community we're building here together. The hashtag for the festival is hashtag OEFF2021. Thanks again to all of you for being here. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Al Walker, and I will be your facilitator for tonight in our film presentation. I come from this space from the sustainability focus. I got introduced to One Earth Film Festival and was asked to participate by a co-member of the Chicago Sustainability Leaders Network, Mr. Dig Alton, to whom I'm grateful for the experience that we've had so far serving as facilitators, both in the virtual and in the in-person space. So tonight, I would like to just take a brief moment to say that I am also a member of Windsor Park Lutheran Church, which was one of the host sites where I serve as the property team lead. And I am a retired member of the United States military. I was an Army Special Logistics and Transportation Engineer Specialist. And I am very honored to have been picked to introduce our panelists and be the facilitator for our film this evening. Our panelists are the film director from Mermaids Against Plastic, Tamara, Sylvia Johnson, the director from Damned to Extinction, Michael Peterson, and the writer from Damned to Extinction, Stephen Hawley. And from the shared Aquarium, we had Jaclyn Wegner. After we've enjoyed the film, we'll take some time to reflect and create space to have dialogue about the films that we watched tonight. And it will be very ably facilitated, our discussion, by our panelists. And then we will also give you some space to share your thoughts, your questions, and to be a part of that conversation. Our knowledgeable and well-informed facilitators will lead us in this effort, and we look forward to having you participate and enriching this dialogue. Please make sure to put any reflections and questions in the chat and ways we can explore to take related action. So at this time, I'd like for us to, before we watch the film, to enjoy a short piece entitled Rescuing Our Reefs. It's directed by our Young Filmmakers Contest 2021 first place animation winner, Jessica Bukowski. Jessica is a senior at Tamalpais High School in Mille, California. Immediately after Rescuing Our Reefs, we will watch Mermaids Against Plastic, Tamara. It is now my pleasure to bring in the director of Mermaids Against Plastic, Sylvia Johnson, to introduce you to her film.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight for these important films and conversations. So I was inspired to make the Mermaids Against Plastic film that you're about to see after going on vacation to one of my favorite remote areas of the Mexican Caribbean. And I was completely shocked by the amount of plastic I found washing up on the beaches. So I realized then that the plastic was coming from all over the world, and that not only do many of us who don't live by the ocean not realize what is happening, that we also have a huge responsibility for this problem. One of my very favorite things about this film is that it is told from the point of view of a Mexican woman, and the stunning underwater footage was shot by a woman cinematographer, which is a real rarity in the film world. The issue of plastic pollution has become so much more relevant during the global COVID-19 pandemic as the amount of single-use plastic has totally skyrocketed. So I really hope that this film inspires you to want to take action to reduce plastic in order to protect our oceans and ourselves. Enjoy the film, and I'll be back afterwards for any questions you might have.
Okay, David, some of the scenes I remember were when the narrator said that when she and her team tried to collect plastic from out of the ocean, it did not look any different 2 hours later, and how she said that if we do not protect oceans and coral reefs, tourism will be negatively impacted. And beautiful underwater life What a contrast with the plastic trash. Mitzi, the amount of plastic in the water and how it breaks down into such small pieces. It doesn't go away. It's now my pleasure to bring back the writer of our film here and start with our panel. Sylvia Johnson, the director of Mermaids Against Plastic, and Jaclyn Wegner of the Shed Aquarium. Welcome, ladies. So, what was it that inspired the writing or the directorial work of this film overall, would you say, Sylvia?
Yeah, so I went on vacation, I think in 2016, in a really, really remote area outside of a national park preserve in the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'd been there before several years earlier, and it was totally pristine, totally protected. And we got in late at night, and I woke up in the morning and we went for a walk on the beach, and you couldn't walk more than 10 feet without picking up a garbage bag full of plastic. And I was just horrified. I had no idea. And as I walked along, I was picking up items that I used regularly. And then I started looking at the labels, and things were coming from Russia, from China, from the US, from Central America, from all over the world. And it really made me just realize how much we are all a part of this problem, and how much people who don't live in places like that just don't necessarily even know that what's happening. So that was the original inspiration. And then in 2017, I was at a workshop at the Conservation Media Group where Tamara and several other women who are part of this group called Mermaids Against Plastic were also participating. And I met them, and I was like, this is the way to tell that story. These women are phenomenal. And we then applied for a National Geographic grant to do it. But that was the original inspiration.
Okay, great. We have a question from Miss Jenny. Question is, how do we get ocean cleanups organized?
There are lots of great groups around the world who are doing ocean cleanups. I think there's a group that's called Ocean Cleanup. I should know that website off the top of my head. But to be totally honest with you, I really have not focused on the ocean cleanup part. I think it's an important element. But where I've really focused much more of my time and energy is on figuring out ways to address kind of root cause problem solving and systemic change. How do we push back on corporations? How do we push policy forward in order to stop the flow of plastic into the oceans? So I think if you just do a simple Google search for ocean cleanup, you will find lots, because there are lots of organizations who are doing that. And that is definitely a piece of the puzzle. And I encourage you to think beyond that as well, to the root cause.
Sylvia,
Thank
I'll
you,
add
Sylvia.
to that, because Shed Aquarium,
Absolutely. Thank you, Jaclyn.
We host a program called Shed Aquarium Action Days, where we give people a chance to join us in doing cleanups on the Lake Michigan shoreline, the Chicago River shoreline. But we also work with an organization that is a bit broader called the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So I know we have folks from the Chicago area and our region. But as you mentioned, too, there are some broader national ocean cleanup orgs as well. But what you'll see when you clean up, and this was mentioned in the film, and somebody mentioned it in the chat, that we'll do cleanups, and it is really important for us to remove trash from these aquatic ecosystems. But it doesn't stop coming, so that is absolutely why we need to cut it off at the source, just as Sylvia said. So I think it's a helpful opportunity to make a difference with the cleanup and to learn what kinds of items are ending up in our on our shorelines. But we can't clean this problem up at the shoreline. We really need to look at prevention and reducing our use of plastic at the start.
Thank you, Jaclyn. We have a question from Peter. What caused the sudden change in the amount of debris 2 years before the film? It's been growing gradually for years.
Yeah, it has been growing. Sorry. It's been growing gradually for a long time, actually. And one of the things that happens in this particular region, in the Mexican Caribbean, is that the way that the ocean jet streams move, there are certain times of year or different storm patterns where plastic gets deposited there from all around the world. So I think actually what had probably happened is that, one, it wasn't as bad a couple years earlier, but also I happened to be there at a time where it wasn't washing in this great, massive arrival of plastic. Because we witnessed that even when we were filming. There were some days where the plastic was unbelievably bad and other weeks where it wasn't as bad. So it has a lot to do with how it's moving in the jet streams of the water, I think. But that said, plastic has continued to increase, especially single-use plastic, really over the last 40 years from when it first came out.
Thank you, Sylvia. A question from Sandy. What goes wrong in the supply chain that actually leads to the plastic getting into the ocean?
Well, I would start even before the plastic getting into the ocean. I think a lot of it actually comes from, it arrives in the ocean from being in waterways, from plastic that we think is getting recycled but doesn't actually get recycled. But actually the core source of the problem is the fact that we were using this material that's really a miracle material in a lot of ways, and it's an extraordinary substance, but we're using it as a disposable item that gets thrown away. And so large quantities of it are produced, and our human habits are to buy them, like buy a water bottle and drink it for 5 minutes, or a cup of coffee that's lined with plastic, and then throw it away. So I think that's really where the problem is coming from, is that we're using this incredible, resilient, strong, flexible material that never really disappears as something that we just throw away regularly. And then in that throwing away, it ends up in our waterways that eventually wash out to the ocean, or we think that it gets recycled, when really a very, very, very small percentage of plastic worldwide gets recycled. Much of it gets shipped to places in Asia and Africa and Latin America, and doesn't actually ever get recycled.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, Jaclyn?
Yeah, I would like to add something. Just that a lot of people are advocating to have much more responsibility on the producer end. And I think that this is really important because producers create plastic materials because it's really cheap to make them out of lightweight and oil or fossil fuel-based materials. And then it ends up, in a store, restaurant business, and then ends up in our hands. And then it's up to us to try to dispose of those things properly. A lot of our cities don't have adequate recycling, or a lot of plastics just aren't recyclable, such as plastic bags or plastic straws are not really easy to recycle. And so if we're able to actually bump up that responsibility on the producer end, that's really going to help us to have more of a circular economy, or a kind of recapturing of that plastic, so that it's not always, the responsibility placed on the consumer to make sustainable choices.
Thank you. And a question from Maya. What does the shared aquarium play in reducing plastic waste? And another question that says, sheds the straw?
Yeah, so a couple things. For one, we're an aquarium, so we're a business, and we do use a lot of materials and plastics. We have a gift shop and a dining service, and so we have made huge strides over the last decade or so to reduce our plastic footprint. Within our cafes, we've moved all to compostable packaging or reusable ware in some of our cafes, where we can just use reusable forks and knives and plates and things like that. And so we've done a lot to reduce our own plastic footprint. But we also partner with communities and businesses to look for ways to reduce plastic as well. Just a couple weeks ago, we launched a new program that's very similar to our Shed the Straw campaign, and it's actually building off of that. The program is called Let's Shed Plastic, and it's a partnership program to work with restaurants so that we can give them some guidance in ways to reduce their plastic, and also give them some tools so that they can educate their customers and their staff and really generate, hopefully, a big culture shift here in Chicago around our restaurant industry, so that we can collectively support restaurants in moving away from disposable plastics and more towards reuse and better alternatives. So those are a couple of the examples that we're doing, again, in addition to cleanups on the kind of downstream end of the plastic life cycle.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. I'm sorry, Jaclyn. Let's see if we have any more questions. Edward, while the USA needs definite improvement, isn't the vast majority of ocean plastic coming from Asia? Are these countries driving any changes?
Yeah, the large majority is coming from Asia, but that does not mean that it's a small quantity coming from the US. There's still a lot being generated here in the US as well. And there are activists and people working on this in Asia as well. There's a lot of campaigns there to reduce plastic. And there's other factors at play, right? So there are policy solutions out there on the table that policymakers are discussing right now about how do we make this a global issue, because the oceans obviously aren't just related to one country, and especially as it's very clear in Mexico, things move on the streams of these oceans. So Asia is a big problem. The US is a big problem. It's a global problem. And there are people working on it all over the world, but we need to move fast because this problem is big, and there's a lot of desire to increase plastic production on the part of the companies who make it.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, let's see. All right. I neglected to make a proper introduction to each of our panelists here. I'll do that really briefly. So, Sylvia is the director of Mermaids Against Plastic. She is a photographer, filmmaker, and impact strategist whose work focuses on humanizing stories of injustice, hope, and conservation to inspire strategic action towards change. Jaclyn Wegner is Director of Conservation Action at the Shared Aquarium. Jaclyn she mobilizes with her team individuals, communities, and businesses to take action for animals through activities like restoring local habitats and opting for sustainably sourced seafood and that are not plastic, that reduces the use of plastic. So Stephen Hawley of Dam to Extinction is, along with Michael Peterson, who is the director. Stephen is the actual filmmaker, and I will have the film introduced by Stephen.
This is a film about some unique pods of killer whales that swim around the coast off of Seattle, Washington, but it's also a film about what has been for thousands of years their staple food source, which is Chinook salmon. Environmental films tend to fall into a trap, I suppose you could call it. And the trap is, this is what once was. And in the process of making this film, Michael and I really wanted to avoid that trap as best we could. For the ocean that the whales swim in, there is not an abundance of Chinook salmon like there once was. So, but there's an interesting proposal on the horizon. It was far on the horizon when we first started making this film, and it's come a lot closer. And the solution, the silver lining to the dilemma that these whales face in their shortage of food, is that the main source of Chinook salmon in the eastern Pacific Ocean for tens of thousands of years was the Columbia River. And Michael and I live on opposite sides of the Columbia River here, about an hour east of Portland. There used to be somewhere on the order of 10 million salmon swimming in the 10 million Chinook salmon that would swim up the Columbia every year. Now there's fewer than 100,000. And the reason that number has dropped is fortunately not climate change or things that we don't have as much control over. But what happened in the Columbia is they built a suite of 31 federal hydroelectric dams that eliminated habitat that these salmon need at the beginning and the end of their lives. And so the idea is to remove just 4 of these dams and open up the biggest intact remaining habitat that these fish would have. If you were to remove those 4 dams, you would get salmon back in the Columbia, and hopefully some of those salmon would go into feeding the mouths of these whales. So that's the issue. As filmmakers, I think we also wanted to depict the beauty of what is still one of the world's richest marine ecosystems. It stretches from the Continental Divide in central and eastern Idaho, and the effect of this marine ecosystem goes all the way out past the continental shelf. And so you have scenes of kind of alpine beauty with giant ponderosa pines and granite peaks. And you have scenes of the tranquil and also sometimes very stormy eastern Pacific Ocean. And that's, of course, where these whales hunt. So one last description here before we roll the film. The main character of the film is this fellow named Ken Balcom. Ken started studying these whales back in 1976. And he is still studying them. He's 82 years old now, and he's still getting out on a boat and mostly photographing these whales. And there's a system by which you can identify these whales by the individual prints on their fins and on their bodies. And we'll let Ken talk more about that. But to me, one of the biggest impressions I was left with in making this film is that it's so rare to have a scientist like Ken that's devoted his entire career to studying these whales. And the knowledge that he has of these creatures is phenomenal. His research assistants, his fellow scientists, have told me that they not only recognize Ken's boat when it's out on the water, but one of them said that they actually recognize Ken. So you'll see as you watch the film that these are amazing creatures. Their intelligence rivals certainly our own. And I hope you enjoy the film, and we'll talk afterwards. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Uh, thank you so much for continuing to stay with us and join us in this evening's presentation of all of our films. At this time, we're going to go back to our reflection question, and you can share this in the chat. What are some of the scenes, people, or lines in the film that you remember? And please, at this time, go to the chat and just express that. We'll do that for about 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you. Jody says, the story of the grieving mother, Orca, brought me to tears, as well as the gentleman who was in tears about what his generation has done to the environment. Maya says, it's time to act, so powerful. Maple says, crying. Yanira said, excellent movie, very touching. Anne says, Salmon and Wills are world treasures. Ms. Jenny says, action, not words. Jen says, amazing to hear that each pod has its own language, but when they come together, they use a common language. How beautiful. Ms. Jenny also says, I can't believe that change for the better can't be brought into play before it's too late. We can't give in to this being how it is and will be. The only way is for change. Okay, looks like we've got some very poignant perspectives here. At this time, we're going to make a transition. Unless there are some more questions, we'll go ahead and introduce our panel now. So we will be reintroducing our panel and telling you a little bit more about who they are. Our first panelist is Michael Peterson. He's the director of Dam to Extinction. Michael is a documentary film director living in the Pacific Northwest. His love of the outdoors and passion for the preservation of the land, animals, and those who live in it lends the imagery he captures to be timeless and relevant. We have Stephen Hawley, the writer. Stephen Hawley is a writer from Hood River, Oregon. He's a correspondent for the Drake magazine and the author of Recovering a Lost River, written in 2011 under Beacon Press. His next book on river conservation is forthcoming from Patagonia Books, due in 2022. And we'll be reintroducing Jaclyn Wegner, Director of Conservation from the Shed Conservation Action from the Shed Aquarium. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, panelists. We will start with a few questions for our panelists. Please add your questions to the chat and we will soon try to get to at least a few of them. Actually, we've got quite a few questions already, so we can go ahead and get started on these. So our all panelists, where do each of you draw inspiration for your work? We'll start with you, Jaclyn.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm really inspired by the film that we just watched, and I'm excited to hear more from the gentleman who wrote and directed it. But I have been really inspired by the conversation happening in the Vimeo chat, and I think, I find my inspiration by finding community in the things that I care about, and that's really what today is all about, getting to learn from and connect with each other and really figure out what are the things that we just need to share these solutions so that we can mobilize and act together. So getting to see this film and just see how children and scientists and residents in the area and politicians, a lot of folks are really trying to push towards solutions, and that kind of momentum and kind of shared solution seeking is what really inspires me.
Thank you, Jaclyn. And Stephen?
I think young people have been really inspiring, not only in the process of making this film, but when I see who's doing what to address some of the major crises facing our planet, and certainly my part of the world, what's going on with these whales and the salmon. It's, I have a daughter who's 13. Michael has a daughter that just turned 14. And I'm constantly amazed by their insights and their wisdom into how we might go about fixing the predicament that we put ourselves in. And then I guess the second thing is I happen to live in a place where it's pretty easy to be inspired just by going outside and seeing some of the amazing places where there's still intact wilderness, intact rivers that give us inspiration for how we might improve the places that aren't so pristine anymore. So
Thank you, Stephen. And Michael?
Well, Stephen and I were floating down the Deschutes River, one of our favorite rivers in the Northwest, about 6 years ago when he proposed the idea of bringing one of the chapters to his book to life. And rivers are something that both Stephen and I are really in love with. They show the interconnectedness of so many things. We've got animals that begin their lives over 1,000 miles apart, yet they're just linked in the most intimate way. So it really shows how connected everything is, and what we need to do to save everything is what you do locally can affect so much more than what you might expect.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Next question from Nicole. If the dams are money losers, who is benefiting behind the scenes so that the politicians refuse to take action?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, it so happens that the hydropower business in this part of the world, in the Pacific Northwest, was kind of a. Remember a few years ago when a senator from Alaska proposed building this bridge to nowhere? When these dams were built before the Second World War, it was kind of that scenario. Like, why do you need that amount of energy in a part of the country where there just aren't that many people? And then World War II started, and all of a sudden the federal government and then President Roosevelt sort of looked like a genius because we had this, dynamo to power the factories to make ships and planes. Well, that wasn't the intent of that system. It wasn't supposed to be a subsidy to industry, but that's kind of what it became. And for years, it was the aluminum industry until the aluminum industry figured out that they could do things more cheaply and actually not obey as many environmental laws if they moved to South America mainly. But now we have a whole new sort of subsidized industry that's come on the scene, and it's data centers. Just up the river from Michael and I here, Google has a data center that uses about the same amount of electricity as the entire city of Tacoma, Washington. And they're expanding, and it's simply a matter of uh, the the hydro system, the federal hydro system, bending over backwards to make sure that these industries get the cheapest power that they possibly can. So the question is, does a company like that sells about $15 billion worth of advertising every year, do they really need an energy subsidy from the Pacific Northwest, especially if that's costing us orcas and salmon? And I think we found a number of people in the film that said no, and I'm going to mute my microphone because my phone's.
And Michael, can you pick up from there, please?
Absolutely. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I grew up right underneath these dams. They've been there my whole life, and the thought of ever taking them down is just foreign to so many people. Especially in that part of the world, we build structures like that. We don't tear them down. The interesting thing about the 4 dams that are focused on in the movie, this is really confusing to some people because they think about the entire Columbia hydro system. But we're only focusing on these 4 dams because they're the most egregious. They're the ones that kill the most fish, and arguably they're the ones that are not needed anymore. The power that's produced by these dams is pretty minimal, and it also is produced primarily in the springtime when we don't need it. And as Tony Jones pointed out, most of that power was being sold to places like California, and now California is doing a great job of creating their own power in renewables and other ways that they're not buying that power from us anymore. So the reason they're still there is partially because it's just status quo. There's a lot of subsidized industry, like Stephen said, the barging industry, which could easily be replaced with rail. as we showed in the film. The power that is created by those dams could easily be replaced with solar. And the wind industry is already making a huge dent. So it's more, again, I think it's because they've always been there. That's why they're still there. And there's a lot of people that are starting to wake up and realize that we don't need them. I think it might be time to talk about Mike Simpson a little earlier than I had anticipated, but there's a conservative Republican from Idaho who just proposed a bill to plan to remove these 4 lower Snake River dams. And I'd like Stephen to pick up on that because he's kind of an expert on the subject.
Sure. Yeah. So the other thing, another reason, I guess, that these dams are still here is that they have enjoyed for at least 50 years the unanimous support of all the congressional representatives in the Pacific Northwest. The conventional wisdom for a half century has been, if you want to be reelected, don't mess with the hydro system. Well, 2 years ago, this red-blooded conservative Idaho Republican named Mike Simpson gave a speech that basically said all options to bring my salmon back to my home state need to be on the table. And I'm going to study this, and I'm going to come up with a plan. So he studied it for 2 years, and the plan that he came up with was just released at the beginning of February. And it proposes removing the dams, and it proposes compensating the industries that will potentially lose out when the dams come down. And what it needs right now is a critical mass of support from people who care about this issue, who care about the whales, who care about the salmon. The first thing that you could do is look up Mike Simpson on the internet. We should have this up on our website. We could make it easy for people. But in the meantime, if you look up Mike Simpson on the web and send him a note thanking him for doing what he's doing, boy, that would be a huge shot in the arm for him and his staff, because right now, because of the political climate we live in, it is not popular for Republicans to talk about removing dams, or it's not popular for them to talk in support of environmental issues like this one. So he really needs support from people all over the country. And then the other thing he needs is a fellow congressional representative to help him turn this proposal into a bill. So if you are so moved, if you wanted to get in touch with your congressional representative and say, hey, I just saw this movie, and I would love it if you would support Mike Simpson to get these dams taken down. So there's just stump speech that, for the cost of watching the movie. Thanks for entertaining the idea.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. We have a question from Sylvia. What was your favorite moment in making this film, and what was the most challenging?
Go, Michael.
I can start on that one.
Yeah.
I have to say, one of my favorite things was Jeannie Hyde making orca sounds. She has studied these animals for so long. She's the one that sleeps with the hydrophones by her bed so she can hear, and she can tell the differences between each pod and their dialects that they have. And I just loved being on the boat with her and seeing her dedication to these animals, and loved hearing her, make squeaks and try and mimic the kitty sound of some of the orcas. So that was one of my favorite things. I mean, there were so many. It was one of the hardest, but one of my favorites was when we interviewed Carrie Nightwalker Schuster. Steve and I were both tearing up behind the camera. She was talking about her family and what happened when the reservoir took over where they lived. And of course, spending all the time with Ken and Giles and Tony and of course, London Fletcher with her just such enthusiasm and brightness at such a young age. All those were just really bright spots. As far as like challenging, try and shoot footage of an elephant swimming through the water from a waggling boat. I mean, getting good whale footage was very difficult. So we had an amazing videographer, Florian Grainer, that partnered with us on that. And I have to hats off to him for getting us a lot of that great footage. And probably the most challenging thing of it all is taking Stephen's book, which has a lot of details. We just focused on one chapter, and this is a big story, and it covers a lot of territory, and how to make that into a concise film that is understandable for people, that has a positive message, that people aren't like totally depressed when they leave the theater, because it can be a very sad subject, really. So to make a concise story out of that, I think was probably a big challenge. And again, hats off to our editor, Heidi Zimmerman, for taking all the footage that I shot and all the words that Steve wrote and weaving it into a cohesive story that I think has an emotional appeal and solves it solves the purpose of what we were trying to do.
And credit goes to the director as well. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And you, Stephen, anything to add?
Well, we managed to get Ken Balcom. We managed to pry him away from his whales, and I think probably the highlight of the film for me was flying into the wilderness in Idaho. Now, you have to remember that Ken is now over 80. Back then, I think he was pushing 80. And the plane is a small, small affair. And we were trying to keep the weight to a minimum. And I had a tent for him. And he goes, in his usual laconic way, he said, "Don't bother with the tent. I don't need it." And I thought, man, this guy's maybe he doesn't know what he's up against. Well, come to find out that part of his training as a Navy officer was to be basically let loose in the woods wearing not much more than his underwear, and they had to survive for like 72 hours in the cold and the rain. And not only what I discovered about Ken is not only is he extremely insightful, observant, and intelligent, he's tougher than leather too, because it was near freezing the night that we were there, and all I heard was him snoring, more or less. So it was he's an impressive guy for sure.
Thank you. Another question. Anna asks, this is for Jaclyn, what key issue in the film might Shed be working on? Are any of the issues relevant to our Great Lakes?
Well, I know in the Chicago area, there have been some dam removal projects as well. And so during the film, I was curious and I was looking up some information about dams just because I wanted to think about how we can learn from what's going on in the Pacific Northwest and understand some similar challenges that might be happening elsewhere. There are actually 90,000 dams in the U.S. And since the 19-teens, nearly 1,800 of them have been taken down. So we're kind of in a phase of trying to recognize what these problems are, where we have habitats that are disconnected and how we can restore those spaces. And that's absolutely something that Shed wants to advocate for, so that we can continue to have healthy, connected habitats, and just again recognizing the theme that came up during our first film as well as this one, that habitats are all connected and we're all connected. So when we're making smart decisions, even just in our backyard and our neighborhood, that can impact wildlife and wild places around the globe. Here in Chicago, we're kind of right on the Great Lakes, and we're also right over by the Mississippi. And so we impact these bodies of water, but then both of those flow out to the oceans. And so a lot of ways for us to, again, reduce our use of plastic and reduce our use of pesticides and chemicals and things to keep these aquatic habitats healthy. And then one other thing that I just wanted to mention is that science was a big theme of this film, as far as, needing to understand the problem and track it over time so that we could put our finger on understanding the reduction of salmon and how it was impacting orca populations. So I want to encourage people to, support and contribute to community science. Shed Aquarium has a project called Great Lakes Fish Finder. It's an app through iNaturalist. And if you're an angler or an outdoors person, you can document what fish you're finding in the Great Lakes area. And there are other cool community science projects too that are really important for gathering data so that we can make informed decisions about how to protect wildlife.
Thank you, Jaclyn. Another question from Sashi and Peter. What is the status of the four dams today? Are initiatives for their removal progressing? Where are Inslee and the Biden administration on this issue?
Well, we covered a little bit of that ground already. The economist that we interviewed, Tony Jones, is actually quoted in a piece that was in the Los Angeles Times today. I think it was an editorial. It was in the op-ed section. But Tony has done more research on those dams, and he figured out that over the past decade, actually it's longer than that, almost since the turn of the century, the 21st century, he looked at all the hours that those dams have been producing energy, and he found only 2 out of over 10,000 hours that the power from those dams was actually used inside the region. The rest of the time it was going south to California, where these days it's frequently sold at a loss. As you heard Linwood Lahi say, there's the ports that run barges up and down the Columbia and Snake River are actually losing money because commodity shippers have figured out there's more efficient and cheaper ways to get their goods out to port. So economically, they haven't. What we depicted in the film has not changed. Biologically, the situation is just as desperate as it was when we made the film, if not more so. So we have the facts on our sides. The last sort of puzzle that we need to solve is the politics of this, and that's why I was encouraging folks that are still watching to get in touch and offer encouragement to Representative Mike Simpson's office, because he's the one that is proposing to remove these dams. And if you do want to read that article in the LA Times, it was in today's paper, today's Los Angeles Times. So yeah, that's the update. Michael, you want to add anything to it?
I think that was perfect. Yeah, that's
okay.
Exactly where we are.
Thanks, Gail. How would removing just these 4 dams make enough difference when there are other dams on the river?
Well, that was something I was talking about earlier. There's 8 dams that we're really talking about that are in the way of the salmon getting up to this pristine spawning habitat in northern Idaho. 4 of those are on the main stem of the Columbia, and 4 of those are on the Snake. And the ones we're talking about are just the 4 on the Snake, and they are arguably the most egregious fish killers. The water is shallower, it heats up more, and so if those 4 dams were gone, there'd be more than 50% less of an impediment for these dams for the fish to have to travel by. So proportionally, it would be a huge amount of positive, way to help the fish get up and down the river. Yeah. So, and like I was saying, out of the 8 dams, these 4 are the worst, and removing them would make it so the fish could get up and down the river a lot better.
Let me add to that real quickly. I would just say too that it's hard to, I don't have a terrible map of the East Coast in my head, right? I mean, somebody's constantly having to remind me that Boston is nowhere near Chesapeake Bay, right? So if you're not from the Pacific Northwest, this is kind of a hard thing to visualize. But those 4 dams on the Snake River in eastern Washington, remember, if anybody of you still in the audience has ever been to Yellowstone National Park, well, right south of Yellowstone is Grand Teton, and actually the headwaters of the Snake River are in Grand Teton National Park. This is a long river, 1,100 miles. So it swings south out of those mountains in Wyoming, runs all the way through the desert in Idaho. And as it turns north at the Oregon-Idaho border, it picks up this incredible suite of mountain rivers. And what those 4 dams on the lower Snake River in eastern Washington block is access to all of those wilderness rivers. So it's not just the Snake River. It's 4 million acres of wilderness that was actually set aside in the 1970s with the express purpose of saving salmon. So by everything that Michael said is true, but an added bonus, if you get rid of those dams, it removes a choke point in the salmon's migratory corridor, and they would have unfettered access to all of that high, cold, wild areas. It's, I believe, one of the largest, I think it is the largest roadless area left in the lower 48 states. And there's over 5,000 miles of wilderness quality streams there where salmon could spawn. So it's really kind of the biggest bang for the buck, as Ken Balcom says in the movie. You not only get the habitat where those dams lie, but a whole bunch more of it upstream of there.
Okay, thank you. We have about a minute left for questions. I'll just ask one final. Rachel said, do you feel depressed or hopeful about the future for orcas and salmon?
Both. Both. I think that's the only reasonable answer. There, as I said when I introduced the film, there is definitely a kind of trap that you could fall into making an environmental film, which is the world is facing a huge ecological crisis right now. And the reason to make a movie like this is not to have people be sad and walk away. I think the idea is to get people to those feelings to catalyze some action. And, we may never see the day, we probably won't see the day when there are 30 million salmon swimming in the Columbia and Snake Rivers again. But we could get to 5, and that would certainly save these orcas. And all it takes is for people to, take into heart what hopefully the movie stirred up for them, and pick up the phone, call Mike Simpson, look at our website, and look at some of the groups that are working on this issue. It is a problem with a solution. And that's an easy thing to forget given the dire circumstances these animals face. But this is most definitely a problem with a solution.
I'm confident that the salmon can return. And as long as there's 2 orcas swimming in the ocean, I'm going to keep hopeful and fighting for them. So,
thank you all. And we will move on to our next portion of this segment. Take some reflection time now for the panelists. We will start with a quote from Robert Swan, an activist. The greatest for our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And so with that, I'll turn this over to our panelists with this question. What actions can people take to be part of the solution? This may include actions anyone can take or actions communities, organizations, governments, and companies can take. I'll start with Rachel, with Jaclyn. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think being here today, of course, is a great first step. And I love how it was just said that as we learn about problems, we can also look at solutions and learn more about them. And so one thing that I love to encourage is to learn more, not just about a narrow problem, but to always try to put it in a context. Like, how can we hold folks accountable to solutions around these issues? And so learning about that broad context is important, but then also thinking about just what your sphere of influence is. And I know that's been, of course, a great theme for us here today. It is important for each of us to make a difference in our daily life. But also, I think it's just so helpful when we know that other bigger system changes are happening, or other folks who are, part of the whole system are also kind of holding up their end of the deal. It's kind of the act local, think global thing. It really is an important strategy.
Cool.
Well, was that for Michael?
Yes,
sir.
Okay. So, just about a year ago, Steve and I had the privilege of doing a TEDx talk in Big Sky, Montana. If you have a chance, it's on our website. You can watch it. It addresses this topic a little more, a little more updated things. So it's on damnedtoextinction.com's website. And I really like what we said at the very end of the film, or the very end of the TED Talk, and that's simply talk to people, because the echo of your voice can save these amazing animals.
thank you. Very powerful. And Stephen?
I would just say talk to people, because the echo of your voice can save these amazing animals.
That was definitely
repeating.
being said twice.
Yeah. Do if you're looking for something, a concrete action, I would mention one more time, do call Mike Simpson's office. Tell him that you are inspired and encouraged by what he's trying to accomplish. And if you're really inspired, you want to see something really cool. If you want to see a fish that swims 1,000 miles up river to spawn in a high elevation habitat in the mountains around Stanley, Idaho, you will be, I guarantee you will be as inspired as seeing a grizzly bear or a blue whale or any of those other amazing iconic creatures. These fish are endurance athletes. They are the basis of indigenous religion and economy for thousands of years, and we owe it to themselves to make room for them in our future.
Thank you. The next slide summarizes some top actions related to both films and submitted by our panelists, as well as by tonight's hosting sponsors, partners, and team. There are specifically 3 here that our panelists can chime in on, because it's something that they particularly are motivated by. Can we hear a little bit about the Sheds action, Jaclyn?
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all of those great action steps. And I think that there are a lot of ways, again, to learn more, explore the conservation or environmental issues that are most important to you, and look for ways to combine forces. I really love the comments about, I'm going to have to bottle that, about the echo of your voice having a greater impact. And so when you combine your passion and your resources with those around you, you're going to be able to make a much greater impact. So that's kind of my takeaway from today. I'm really inspired by the films that we saw and from the conversation that we were all able to have.
Thank you. And here are some of the actions. Connect with nature, communicate and learn, live lightly on the earth, and finally, use your voice. We too often sometimes see the problem, we know the problem, and we sometimes choose to suffer in silence and not use our voice to express the problem and maybe seek assistance in resolving it. So Use your voice, definitely. So now for our next portion of the evening, we're winding things down here. So please, as we close out, I hope you felt a sense of One Earth's 10-year theme of inspiring change throughout the film, in discussion, and in how we came together to build community around critical issues. If you would, and we'd love for you to tell us now in the chat about ways you are ready to take action to make inspired change. So please take a few moments to do that. Audience action ideas. Stop using single-use plastic. That's a great one. From Maya. Call our representatives in support of dam removal. Also from Maya. From Miss Jenny. I am ready to make inspiring change by doing cleanup, recycling, and spending less on material objects. From Mary. We'll call Mike Simpson. At this time, I would like to give our heartfelt thanks to our panelists. We have our two film makers today. We have Michael and Stephen for Dam to Extinction. We have from our first film, we have Sharon from our first film, the our first film, Mermaids Against Plastic. And then we have Jaclyn, Director of Conservation Action from the Shed Aquarium. We really do appreciate the time that was spent and the efforts that were made for this evening's event. And we now look forward to some more of our events that are upcoming throughout the film here, throughout the film year for the 10th anniversary. So here are some of the websites that you can go to support what you've seen today. We have Mermaids Against Plastic, Dam to Extinction, and the Shed Aquarium. Also my congregation's church, Windsor Park. And we would like to thank you for the time that you spent. To learn more about our panelists and stay in touch with their work, these are the links on the side. Remember to tweet, post, or share about what you just experienced online and in social media. If you found value in today's event, please donate to One Earth Film Fest and join us again for another film event this week. Also, as a reminder, Earth Week is in April. We will also be having another mini film fest at that time, and we'll be having other events throughout the year. Last but not least, a huge thanks to each and every one of you for being here and participating. Let's all give ourselves and our program participants one last round of applause. Thank you so much. See you soon at another screening event.